They thought they were starting fresh, but the house had its own story to tell. Ashford Manor had been waiting for them, and it wasn't going to let them leave. The Haunting of Ashford Manor.
In the shadows, it waits. You feel it creeping closer, but you can't run. The whispers, they know your name. The darkness calls, and it will never let you go. Horror stories with phantom reverberations.
The Thompson family had just moved into Ashford Manor, an old, sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. The house was magnificent, yet its age seemed to hide many secrets. Sarah Thompson stepped into the dimly lit living room. The air felt dense, as if something ancient and restless lingered within the walls. She tried to shake it off. "It's just the house," she told herself. Mark, her husband, laughed off her concerns. "It's just an old house, Sarah. Let's make it our home." But even he couldn't ignore the strange unease that seemed to seep into the air with each passing hour. That night, the family settled into their rooms, trying to get some rest after the long move. But as Sarah lay in bed, she heard it, a soft, distant whisper. "Sarah?" It was faint, like a breath, but it chilled her to the bone. She turned to Mark, but he was fast asleep. She tried to ignore the voice, but it came again, louder this time. "Sarah, come closer." She got up and walked toward the hallway, but there was nothing there. The next day, Sarah explored the house further, hoping to distract herself from the unsettling feeling. She wandered into the attic, where she found an old chest covered in dust. Inside the chest were several old journals, photographs, and a map of the estate. But one particular journal caught her eye. The final entry read, "They are watching, they want us." It was signed by the previous owners, gone without a trace. Sarah showed the journal to Mark, but he dismissed it. "It's just old junk," he said. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the house had been waiting for them, that something was watching them. That night, as Sarah lay awake, the whispers returned. They weren't coming from the walls anymore. This time they seemed to be coming from inside her head. "Sarah, we are here." Sarah rushed downstairs to find Mark, but he was standing motionless in the living room, staring blankly at the walls. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Mark, what's wrong?" she asked. He didn't respond. Suddenly, Mark snapped out of his trance. "I don't know what happened," he muttered, "but I heard it too. The whispers. I couldn't stop listening." As the days passed, the whispers grew louder. The house seemed to change, becoming more oppressive. Every room felt colder, every shadow darker. Sarah felt trapped. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Sarah and Mark decided to investigate the house's history. They learned that the original family who owned Ashford Manor had mysteriously vanished over a century ago, but no one knew why. Late one night, Sarah decided to go down to the basement to look for clues. The door creaked open and a blast of cold air hit her face. The whispers were louder down there, almost like they were trying to warn her. In the basement, Sarah found a hidden compartment in the wall. She pried it open and discovered a box filled with old letters. The letters spoke of a curse, a family trapped by dark forces they could not escape. Sarah rushed back upstairs to show Mark, but when she turned the corner, she saw him standing in front of the mirror, his face contorted with terror. "Mark, what's wrong?" she cried. Mark turned slowly, his eyes wide with fear. "There's something in the mirror. Something behind me," he whispered. Sarah looked into the mirror, but there was nothing there, only their reflections. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but the silence felt suffocating. She heard a soft knock at the door, followed by a voice that sent chills down her spine. "Sarah, it's time." Sarah opened the door to see nothing but darkness. The whispers came again, louder now. "Sarah, come to us." She slammed the door shut, her heart racing. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed her everywhere. Mark, too, began to hear the whispers, and the house seemed to respond to their fear. The walls creaked, the lights flickered, and shadows moved across the floor. Sarah and Mark were not alone anymore. One night, Sarah decided to confront the shadows. She walked down to the basement with a flashlight, but when she turned it on, it flickered and went out. The whispers were so loud now, it felt like they were inside her head. In the darkness, Sarah felt something cold brush against her arm. She screamed and stumbled backward, but there was nothing, just shadows that seemed to surround her, closing in. Mark ran down to find her, but when he arrived, the basement was empty. Sarah was gone. The whispers grew louder as if mocking him. "You can't leave," they taunted. Mark searched the entire house, but it felt like the house was shifting. Rooms that weren't there before appeared, and doors that were open now shut on their own. The house itself was changing, trapping them inside. He finally found Sarah in the attic, standing in front of a mirror. Her eyes were glazed, her body stiff. "Sarah!" he shouted, but she didn't respond. Instead, she reached out toward the mirror as if someone was pulling her in. The reflection in the mirror was no longer Sarah's. It was a figure, tall, shadowy, with hollow eyes. The figure smiled, and Sarah reached out to it as if under its control. Mark grabbed Sarah, pulling her away from the mirror, but when he turned to leave, the mirror's reflection shifted. He saw the figure standing behind them, smiling wider, as if it had always been there. Suddenly, the house shook violently. The floors cracked open, and the walls seemed to warp. Mark ran with Sarah, but they couldn't escape. Every time they tried to leave, the house pulled them back in. The whispers grew louder, now deafening. "You will never leave. You belong to us." The walls closed in on them, and Mark and Sarah were trapped, unable to escape the curse of Ashford Manor. Mark turned to Sarah, but she was no longer the woman he had married. Her face was pale, her eyes empty, as if the house had consumed her soul. "Sarah!" "No!" Mark screamed, but she didn't respond. The house seemed to come alive, its walls shifting with the whispers, its floorboards groaning with each step they took. It was as if the house itself was feeding off their fear. Mark ran to the kitchen, but when he opened the door, he was greeted by a horrific sight. The walls were covered in blood, and the floor was soaked. The smell of decay filled the air. The shadows were growing stronger. The floor beneath Mark gave way, and he fell into a hidden room beneath the house. The room was pitch black, and the air felt thick with malice. In the center of the room was a dark figure, standing still. Mark felt the figure's presence behind him. He turned around, but it was gone. The whispers started again, this time in his ear. "You cannot escape. You are one of us now." Suddenly, Sarah appeared at the door, but she was no longer herself. Her face was twisted, her body lifeless. She stepped into the room, her movements jerky, as if controlled by the shadows. Mark tried to escape, but the door slammed shut behind him. The room was closing in, the walls moving toward him, and the shadows were growing darker. He was trapped, and Sarah was no longer Sarah. The house seemed to laugh. The shadows surrounding Mark became darker and more solid, suffocating him. "You are ours," they whispered, their voices blending with the wind. Mark could barely breathe. The air was thick with the presence of something evil, and his vision blurred as the shadows closed in. "I won't let you have me," he muttered, but the shadows were too strong. Just when he thought it was over, the floor beneath him gave way, and he fell into a deeper part of the house. A cold, dark void awaited him below, and the whispers grew deafening. "We will never let you go." Mark reached out, but there was nothing to hold on to. The darkness swallowed him whole, and he felt the weight of the curse press down on him. "No!" he screamed, but his voice was lost in the shadows. The house stood still once more, its secrets hidden in the walls. The whispers faded, but the curse remained, waiting for the next soul to claim. Scene 4 months passed, and the house remained abandoned, but the whispers still echoed through the town. Those who ventured near Ashford Manor could still hear the cries of Mark and Sarah. Locals whispered that the house was cursed, that anyone who stayed too long would be claimed by the shadows. Ashford Manor had become a legend, but its evil never truly left. One evening, a new family moved into the house. The whispers began again, and the shadows stirred. They would soon learn that Ashford Manor's curse was far from over. As they settled in, the whispers grew louder. The family tried to ignore it, but they couldn't escape. Ashford Manor had been waiting, and its hunger was insatiable. The shadows in the corners of the rooms began to move again. The walls began to breathe, and the house seemed to come alive, ready to consume the new inhabitants. One by one, the new family members began to disappear, leaving behind only their terrified screams. The house claimed them, just as it had claimed the Thompsons before them. Ashford Manor stood silent once again. The whispers had stopped, but the shadows still lingered, waiting for their next victim. And so the cycle began again. Ashford Manor would wait for the next family, the next soul, to wander into its cursed halls. The whispers would never cease, and the shadows would never fade.
In the shadows, it waits. You feel it creeping closer, but you can't run. The whispers, they know your name. The darkness calls, and it will never let you go. Horror Stories with Phantom Reverberations.